Hello, so today I'm going to give you the top comps that I think are really good for climbing in the current patch. This is going to be for patch 14.2 that just came out today. So the way that I usually do these type of videos is I will give you 3 reroll comps and 3 non-reroll comps and give you a little bit of an overview on how to play them and why I think they're particularly good. Now these aren't necessarily the highest cap most broken comps. Some of them are, some of them aren't, but these are the ones that I think are very consistent in order for you to climb. Now, before we get any further, please make sure to like and subscribe because it does help me out as a content creator. I usually do stuff like patch reviews as well as guides on how to play certain comps, how to play around certain mechanics of the game. If you want to get the most out of your set 14 experience, please make sure to check out my channel and make sure to like and subscribe because it does help me out. Now, let's start with 3 reroll comps. So, the first comp that we're going to talk about is Vayne reroll. Now, in general, just as an overview of the patch right now, it feels like rerolls are significantly stronger than non-reroll comps, and if possible, I would say to angle yourself towards a reroll line. If a lot of your lobby is rerolling, it also helps to play a reroll comp because the way that TFT works, the units are shared in a shared pool, so if somebody's buying a lot of the same cost of unit, it will be more likely that you see the same cost units but other copies of different units. So basically, if a lot of people are rerolling in the lobby, it's going to help you to hit the reroll units, and then you'll hit ahead of tempo and you'll be a lot stronger than if you were trying to do a different strategy playing on a different type of line. I think one of the stronger comps right now, just by nature of some of the other units in the comp getting buffed, is the Vayne reroll comp. Now, typically when you're playing Vayne reroll, you go for 3-star Vayne, and you also try and go for 3-star Senna and 3-star Jarvan. Now, you could stabilize around Zed as a dual carry, but usually you're going to try and carry Vayne and Senna both in your backline. You play with Vanguard because Vanguard has a nice synergy where you can get in 3 Anima Squad. Usually just take an AD Anima Squad item because your units are going to be doing mostly AD damage because they're a Slayer. This comp can cap very high around a Vanguard emblem or a Slayer emblem because you can basically play 6 Vanguard or 6 Slayer depending on what you hit. Usually when you play this board, it is complete on level 7. If you are high rolling and you have a lot of copies of Vayne, then you can roll on level 7 to try and hit all 3 of Jarvan, Senna, and Vayne. If you think that you're contested or you think that you're going to have a hard time to hit Senna and Jarvan, then you can roll on level 6. Make sure that you have the Vayne 3 because you are going to be a lot more stable with the Vayne 3, and then you can push levels, and instead of going for Jarvan 3, Senna 3, you can go for Zed and Leona. Now, typically, you end up dual carrying with the Zed. But you know, if you can, Senna 3 is going to be a little bit better, a little bit more consistent because it just works out a lot nicer. Like I said, the board is complete on level 7, so you're usually just trying to roll on level 6 or 7, hit your board, and then push levels for legendary units or 5 costs or whatever you can. With Vayne, she really likes attack speed. You want to usually make double Guinsoo. Here I put Guinsoo Runans. I think Guinsoo Runans a little bit more achievable as an item. A lot of times if you have double Guinsoo, the last item is up to you. All of them seem kind of okay. Something like a Giant Slayer might be pretty good. But usually I really like the synergy with Runans. It works really well on Vayne. If you have the Runans Augment category 5, it's also a really good augment for Vayne, and often you can drop a Guinsoo and play double Runans. I would suggest always having at least 1 Guinsoo. You need at least 1. 2 is better. Obviously, I think attack speed, she just works really well off the attack speed, just the way that she scales and rapidly fires the attacks. It kind of works really nicely because her ult scales with the Guinsoo speed, so that works out nicely. It also works with Runans. That's why Runans is a little bit of a better item on her as well. If you're playing around this board, you can also dual carry around Zed. There's also pivot options for playing Zed as a primary carry if you're unable to hit Vayne 3, but we'll talk about that a little bit later when we talk about 4-cost comps. Zed, typically you want Hodge IE, and the last item is up to you. A lot of times it's dependent on the rest of your board. We talked about Zed as a 4-cost in the Divinicorp line, so you can check out the How to Play Divinicorp's video on my channel if you want to know a little bit more about that. But typically when you're playing around the Zed, last item you can make more Omnivamp just so that he kind of like drain tanks and sustains himself. If your if the opponent that you're facing has a lot of burst damage, then you want to make sure that you have like extra survivability either in the form of an Edge of Night or even some extra tankiness with the Titans, or if you just want to go for raw, like just like attack a bunch of times and do as much damage as possible. Sometimes a QSS works really well because it gives him a bunch of attack speed that can make him very bursty, and it also gives him some crit synergy between the other items. Tank items on Jarvan if possible, tank items on Leona if you don't have Jarvan 3, and Rost is changeable with some of the other Vanguards, but he works pretty well here just to get a little bit of Divinicorp bonuses. Next comp we're going to talk about, this is another comp I made a dedicated video on, which is Twisted Fate reroll. So Twisted Fate reroll is not very strong. This isn't a comp that you're usually going to go first with. This Slayer board, if you hit Jarvan 3, Senna 3, Vayne 3, Zed 2, you have a really high chance of going first. You also have many different ways of capping the board around pretty much any 5 cost that you can. There's many ways to cap this board very high. Syndicate, not so much. Typically with this board, you're going to be playing around Twisted Fate 3-star, and you usually go for Darius 3-star because they're both 2-cost units, so it makes it really efficient to roll at level 6. If possible, you can also go for Braum 3. This works really nicely to have them both as 3-stars in your front line. What you always want to do is hit 5 Syndicate. There are variations of this board where you play deeper into Vanguard and you only play 3 Syndicate, but typically you just play 5 Syndicate because you get 2 Syndicate bonus like Kingpin hats. So with those 2 Kingpin hats, usually you put one on Twisted Fate, which is pretty important on him, and then you'll put one on Darius, ideally, who will be like kind of like a solo frontline kind of tank. So a lot of times if you're solo frontlining your Darius, then a Gargoyle is a good idea on him. Twisted Fate, you always want to have as much attack speed as possible. Twisted Fate, if you didn't read his description, is passive, gain 2 ability power each attack. You want this unit to auto attack. You want him to ramp up attacking as fast as possible, as many attacks as possible, because it directly scales to him having a bunch of AP, which does a lot more damage. So typically you're going to go for double Guinsoo. Guinsoo Gunblade. Guinsoo is something that works really well, and it's also a little bit easier on the components. Of course, if you can't make it to double Guinsoo, Guinsoo Gunblade, and then +1 damage item can also work on him. Additionally, if you get AP items, AD items, then you want to put them on Misfortune. Basically, usually you'll just build her with, like, you know, raw damage, like a giant IE, just to make sure that she gets a crit off. I usually go for something like IE Guardbreaker, just a really good item pairing, both being critical of items. And then because you're not playing deep into Dynamo or Dynamo at all, you can also play a Shojin. Now, if this board you actually end up hitting a lot earlier rather than later, you have many options to cap out this board. You can cap out this board around 4 Vanguard. Even a single Aurora is also very good because you basically get an extra unit in, and the Aurora can also synergize with the MF to get Dynamo. So this board does have cap potential, especially if you have a Braum 3. If you have Braum 3, I would suggest playing around 4 Vanguard. Rost you also don't have to go for. If you're playing something like Two's Company, or I forget what it's called, the one where you get free rerolls for all the 2 costs that you play, this board actually works really well with a 2-cost reroll style board, and you can also go for like a Skarner 3 here. I didn't show a rapid fire unit. This is just like, I'm just showing you like at a you know, a level 6-ish board or a level 7-ish board. You don't necessarily need rapid fire if you have a lot of the components here. 5 Syndicate is way more powerful than just playing rapid fire in your early game, but if you're trying to cap out your board, then obviously you can play Kog'Maw, get Boombot synergy on your Skarner 3, and you can play this type of board. A lot of times if you're not playing around this, then you'll just play like a Zeri or something similar like that. You put in rapid fire not as a primary priority, because if you have double Guinsoo and he's attacking a lot, you'd rather have 5 Syndicate in. If you have a Syndicate emblem, it can also work really well. If you're 7 Syndicate, then you're probably winning the game anyways. But that's just like, you know, rule of thumb, just a general note for everybody. Rost is droppable for other Vanguards, by the way. I showed you can drop him for Skarner. You can also drop him for Leona. You can drop him for higher cost Vanguards as well. It's totally fine. The Rost gives generally like a little bit of armor to your whole team, so it's like you think that it's kind of good, but it's not essential. Especially if he's low cost, because this Rost unit doesn't tank very well. So you're basically just playing him for the bonuses, and at that point, if you have an upgraded frontline unit, it might be more worthwhile than the bonuses. Now, the last reroll comp that I want to talk about is Cyberboss reroll, or Vigar reroll. Vigar reroll has a lot of flexibility. This is a board where you have to be really flexible in what you're playing. But typically the main core that you're playing around is Shyvana and Poppy and Vigar, which are these 3 units. I'll put the rest on the side here. Now, Vigar, you usually want to have blue buff and Nashers. The last item is flexible. Here I just put Guardbreaker. If you're fighting against a lot of rerollers, Giant Slayer can give you a lot of value and makes good use of components. But you can also, obviously, if you have like a bunch of rods, you can make a Rabadon. You have lots of opportunities for other items. Shyvana does a lot of damage, so a lot of times with Shyvana you want to have some really good tank items, but she also can work really well with AP tank items. Something like a Crown Guard could be a really good item on her, and it also works really well on some of the later units to cap out your board. When you're playing this board, you usually reroll on level 6, go for Vigar 3, go for Shyvana 3, go for Poppy 3. Now, in order to cap your board, the high cap is obviously to hit in 4 Cyberboss. 4 Cyberboss allows you to have Ziggs as an additional carry. Ziggs can hold a lot of your auxiliary items or utility items. He can hold stuff like Red Buff or Morello or Shiv. So he's a really good unit, and he just can apply a lot of burst damage that can synergize with the Vigar to kind of finish off units really easily. Kabuko has a stun, enough said, really good unit. Crown Guard's a really good item on Kabuko, so if you have like a Crown Guard augment, this can work really well because it works with a lot of the units on this board. If you're trying to complete the board, 4 Techie is really strong, and Viego is one of the 5 costs that kind of got away, kind of slipped through the cracks. I think this unit is extremely strong, extremely broken. If you can find a way to fit a Viego on your board, it's almost always a correct decision. This unit absolutely does so much. So Viego, especially if you're playing deep into his synergies like Techie, will do a lot. Until you have 4 Cyberboss, you have a lot of other options to play different boards. So usually that's like a max cap board, obviously, where I'm showing you a bunch of 5 costs. If you're rerolling, you might not hit all of those 5 costs. In that case, you have a couple options. You can play around Bastions pretty easily. So this is like, you know, you're just trying to play a solid front line for Bastion. This is a board on level 5, and then you have some extra space for some extra units. You can also play this board around Nitro. So if you have like an early Nitro opener, I know Nitro is a lot worse right now, but I think that people are over exaggerating how bad it is. I think it's still one of the better comps, or one of the better cores you can play around because of its flexibility. But there's different ways to stabilize your mid game. This is another way that you can stabilize. Additionally, this board is really strong with playing vertical Techie. Vertical Techie is a valid comp, but usually you play it around brand carry, which we will actually talk about in a little bit. But you could also just play vertical Techie, which involves you just playing a lot of the tech units like this, and you can play towards like 6 Techie around some of the other units. A lot of times you play this and another frontline unit. A lot of the times it usually ends up just being Kabuko anyways, and you usually have one more Techie. Fiddlesticks, that's what I'm looking for, right? A lot of times you can play a board like this. If you don't have the Kabuko, obviously your board will look something like this in your mid game. This board, oops, sorry, I have Kindred. There we go. Your board looks something like this. You can get one more Street Demon in until you hit level 9 around Kabuko. So a lot of times you're playing like a Nico in your front line or something along those lines. There's many different variations of this board, like I was saying before. It's a matter of finding out how to stabilize around it. I don't think this comp is as strong as these two. I think TF is very consistent in getting a solid top 4 placement if you hit. I think the Vayne has a very high cap, so a lot of times the Vayne damage is absolutely broken, especially if you play towards this vertical slayer and you have a good chance of winning the lobby. I think Vigar is neither stable or capable of doing both of those, right? It's like kind of in between, but a lot of it comes down to you trying to find an angle based on what you hit. So if you hit really early, play towards 4 Cyberboss. If you don't hit very early, then play towards more of the Bastion line. If you're kind of like stuck on level 8 that you can't fit in your Cyberboss units, or you don't have a Kabuko yet, you can play this Techie board until you can fit in 4 Cyberboss. That's kind of the idea, right? Depending on how early you hit and how hard you hit, you have to kind of decide. Are you going more towards 5 cost? That means you're really high rolling, you hit early. If you're kind of mid rolling, you go more for the 4 cost version. And if you're like trying to salvage the game and play for placements, then you go for more of the Bastion variation that I showed. And try your best to pick between them based on how your spot is. It's hard to say which one's the best or which one's the worst. You just have to be very careful and aware of what's going on in your game. Now, we talked about all of the reroll comps. Now we're going to start talking about the non-reroll comps. I think that playing around 4 costs is still a viable strategy. However, I think that as more people play reroll and reroll becomes more popular, especially on this patch, you have to be very aware that your comp has to be not only strong, but also you have to have a good spot for it in order to commit to a 4 cost comp. Don't try committing to a comp that's a 4 cost comp that's not necessarily strong or is contested very harshly by the lobby, because you're going to be better off just trying to angle yourself towards a reroll a lot of the time this patch. I might be wrong. Obviously, it's day 1 of the patch. Things might shape up a little bit differently as time goes on. I'm just saying this is how I'm seeing things play out a little bit. And obviously, rerolls are always going to be a little bit stronger, but I'm just saying compared to last patch, the rerolls definitely are creeping up in their power level. However, there are still some 4 cost comps that are very reliable and very strong. One of them is Exotech. Now, Exotech, people used to just play around Nitro. I think I had a discussion about this in my chat today when I was talking to somebody. I honestly think that 7 Exotech is a solid strat and is a really good way to go a lot of the times with these boards. 7 Exotech, if you don't know, Exotech has 2 different things about it, right? Exotech basically gives you an item every time you go from 3, 5, or 7. It basically gives you an extra Exotech item, right? Additional to the Exotech item that it gives you, it also gives you health and attack speed for each item equipped. So it actually has a little bit of like a scrap effect. If you can stockpile a bunch of items on your units, they actually become really tanky. So playing deep into Exotech where you'll gain 3 additional items, it actually works out to be a lot of base HP on your board. This board is unreasonably strong and is very, very stable, especially on level 8. You don't even need to hit a lot of upgrades because you can get so much HP off of having not only the items that you get from your components, but also the 3 additional Exotech items that can give some more HP to your tanks and your backline units. Right now, there is a big change that happened. Pulse Stabilizer or sorry, Flux Capacitor. I forget. Flux Capacitor was the one that was good on Zeri, the yellow item. It's no longer that good. It got nerfed, but Hollow Bow got kind of buffed a little bit. So Hollow Bow is now the way to go. Usually you'll go Gwinsu, you'll go IE, and you'll go Hollow Bow. So you want to make sure that of your Exotech items, at least one of them is a Hollow Bow if you're playing towards this line. So make sure that one is a Hollow Bow. You basically will play 7 Exotech, and then usually you'll just put in a Rapid Fire because it does help out the Zeri. Typically, it'll just be Draven because he's the highest cost Rapid Fire. You can kind of do some extra work. But if you don't have a Draven, that's fine. Zeri should be Zeri should be fine with other copies. This board is other copies of Rapid Fire units. Excuse me. This board is very flexible in the fact that you can, if you have an Exotech emblem, you can play you can play around different units. If you have different Exotech items, you can stabilize around other carries. There's an item that's really good around Nefiri, so if you end up getting like a 3-star Nefiri, that can work really well. Jhin also, it does an abnormally strong amount of damage, so that can work out really well too if you can itemize Jhin until you find your Zeris. The board is quite stable, and that's the benefit of playing around the Exotech board, and especially if you have supporting augments that can increase your tankiness and your sustain, you actually have a really good spot to make the Zeri pop off and do a bunch of damage. In terms of the other Exotech items, I think the worst one right now is like this blue one. That's the one that I think is a little bit awkward. You usually don't want to see it because it doesn't really help that much with your front line, but the I think the purple item is best on Sejuani. I might be wrong. Or in the green item is also pretty good on her. The other items, usually it's Hollow Bow for Zeri. Flux Capacitor isn't as good anymore, but it will still be good on Zeri. And then the other damage items, usually they're good on whoever you can fit them on. So this is a pretty reliable comp. I would definitely try it out if you're looking for like an easy, play all of the same trait type of comp. This is one of the ones that you might have a little bit more success with. The second comp that I want to talk about is Divinicorp Slayers or Zed. This is Zed primary carry. So we already talked about Zed a little bit in terms of items, Hodge, IE, and then last item is very flexible depending on what your lobby has. If you want a general all-around thing, double Omnivamp, usually you can't go super wrong with it because in the worst case you can transfer them over to your Renekton later. This comp is a little bit high roll because without having the Renekton it kind of feels a little bit weak. This comp has a really high cap in finding a Garen. If you see a Garen, it does not matter what your board is, you always have to play the Garen. It's even better often to play the Garen over the Renekton even. I know that sounds really whack. You want to make sure that you get Divinicorp on Zed. If you can get Divinicorp on Zed through God of the Net, then this comp goes from being a third or a fourth or even a fifth. It goes into that, I can play for first, I can play for second. You need to have the Divinicorp on the Zed. If you do not have Divinicorp on Zed, you are not going to be top 4ing. That is just the way it is. You might top 4. Sorry. I should re-explain. You'll probably top 4, but you're not going to get much more than a 4th a lot of the time. You really want to get the Divinicorp on the Zed, so it's really reliant on Garen. When you're playing this type of board, you really want to be uncontested. If somebody's playing Slayer reroll, that's fine, so long as they're not playing around Senna and they're more playing towards Vayne, then you'll still be fine because you could probably hit your Zed in tempo. If you cannot hit your Zed early because, a lot of people are playing around Zed, you're going to have a really hard time playing this comp, so be very careful about that. Usually you're just playing Divinicorp with this version, and then your secondary carry is going to end up being Renekton. Additional items, AP items can be held on Vex, and utility and other AD damage items could be held on Senna, so you actually have a lot of damage. Senna 2, especially Senna 3, extremely strong on this board. You can also play this board from a reroll spot if you're not playing around Vayne, or if you don't have a lot of Vaynes. You can actually play Jarvan Senna reroll with this type of board, and then you can level for the extra Divinicorps or the Renekton or the Garen later. This is another variation if you want to try and merge the two comps that I showed you. I think this comp is really stable and really strong. However, you do need the Zed too early. If you don't have the Zed too early, he might just die, and if that's the case, then you might have some problems getting to a point where you're actually top 4ing. Lastly, the last comp, I think this one's one of the strongest comps in the patch right now. I think it got really popular at the end of the last patch, and that is just playing Street Demon Techie Strategist. So basically, you just play a bunch of Street Demons. Street Demon gives HP to your whole board as well as some base stats, and the Street Demons gain more. You have the Strategist synergy around Nico and Echo. So a lot of times what you do is you'll play around Brand, who is a Street Demon and a Techie. And then you'll play around Ziggs. You have the Strategist and the Techie synergies within Street Demon. So you usually just add in one extra Street Demon unit. In this case, I just put the high cost unit, which is Samira. And you have a really strong core of a board. In order to capitalize on that, a lot of times you play Ziggs as a secondary carry, and then you fit in Kabuko, which fits with the Strategist board, and Mordekaiser and Viego. It's very similar to Strategist Amp. This was a variation of Strategist Amp that you would play if you didn't hit Strategist Amp in the last patch before it got nerfed in B patch. So this comp has been around since the start of the set, and it's not really been altered all that much. It's actually quite strong and quite stable still, especially if you hit an early Viego. Until you find the Viego, you also have variations where you can play deeper into Street Demon. You can play 2 Techie, 7 Street Demon, for example. You can also play other units instead of these units. For example, instead of Samira, you can play another Street Demon, so you have a lot of flexibility. It is a little bit reliant on hitting Nico Echo. If you don't hit some of your frontline units, your frontline might be a little bit glassy, which is something just to be aware of. In terms of Brand, you just want Brand to drop absolute nukes. In some cases, even Archangels can work out well, but it's just sometimes, like, you know, you want the upfront damage. Upfront burst damage might be a little bit better because your front line might not support yourself until you have some of these 2-star 5 costs in order to make this board cap very high. If you're playing around Brand, that's why I say you should do Jewel Gauntlet Guardbreaker, just crit glove pairing of items, get a bunch of damage amp, get a bunch of crit chance, maximize your damage, and then you have a bunch of base stats through Street Demon and Techie. So you have huge amount of base stats, base AP, you have a crit that makes your ability crit, so you'll do a bunch of damage on your crit, and then you have Guardbreaker, which is gonna make you do a bunch of more damage because it's gonna give you damage amp as well as it's gonna pair with the Jewel Gauntlet to give you an increased crit chance. So this is something that works really well, really good item pairing. And then on Ziggs, you can put utility items. If you hit Ziggs 2 before you hit Brand 2, you could carry Ziggs in the interim, right, in the meanwhile until you hit, which is why this board is a little bit more stable, especially if you're playing it and you're stuck on level 8. Additionally, you can play additional strategist units because it does help you out. A Yumi can work really well because especially if you have Samira items, you can then carry Samira in terms of getting some extra amp stacks. Strategist and amp, so you get a little bit more of a high cap, especially if you make it to like a higher level. Until you hit your high level, you're typically just not going to have these 5 costs. In that case, you're just trying to play some of the other units. Like, you know, instead of Kabuko for a while, you know, you might play this with a Ziggs, and then you'll just play, what's it called? You'll just play Mundo and one other Street Demon, right? Like a Rengar. And you can usually stabilize around this type of board until you can make it to level 9. And then at that point, you're better off dropping Street Demon and playing more of the 5 cost units that can cap out your board a little bit higher. But anyways, those are all the boards that I want to show you. So the 3 reroll boards that we kind of went over at the start of the video, and then 3 non-reroll boards. I think these will help you. I tried to pick a variety of boards that are both AP as well as AD, and some boards that have a variety of different carries. Hopefully I explained them well enough. There are some other comps, of course. There's lots of comps that are really strong. Some honorable mentions, of course, would be like, you know, Anima, which I think could still work if you have a really good spot for tempoing. There's some other really consistent comps around some 4 costs, like MF with Dynamos, for example. But a lot of these comps, they need more of a better spot. I think these ones are just the more reliable ones, and these are the ones I'm more comfortable in saying, hey, try these out if you're just looking for, like, you know, the bare minimum to know for the patch. I think these ones will help you get started at least and have like a little bit of success. Thanks for watching. Have a great day and see ya. Bye-bye.